Sorry guys, not really sure what happened there. But yeah, like I was mentioning before, so Impale's basically used as sort of a harass tool early on, then transitioning into the mid game, it's more used for chain disabling people, and I guess comboing with a Finger of Death, whereas Hex is really not used so much for the disable, but it's early on, it's more used for locking them down for that full duration and chain disabling so that you can get a kill. Whereas often you're not getting a level 1 kill with Impale. So making a decision based off that I think is really important depending on the lane that you're going on. Like I said before, the general rule of thumb for me is that if you're a tri lane I would always be getting Hex first, and if you're a dual lane I'd almost always be getting Impale first. This will obviously vary depending on the situation, so it's always important as well depending on the initial bounty rune to be saving this skill point and then just using it for whatever you decide tangible. The second skill point for me would always be the opposite to what you initially got. So if you decide to go for Impale, it would then be Hex next, or if you decided to get Hex first, it would always then be Impale. A variation to this can be Impale and into Mana Drain. So if you're a dual lane against a solo hero, you can then just sort of try and spam as much Impale on him, whereas you're not really going to be using Hex that much in a dual lane against a single hero. Obviously, it has a very large cooldown as well. One thing that I forgot to mention about Hex is that the cooldown is really very large at level 1. So it goes from 30 to 24 to 18 to 12. So this is one of the main factors as well in terms of choosing this skill build. You really either want to put only one level into Hex, or if you are wanting to level it up, you should always be maxing it to level 4. The reason for this is that there's no real value in points 2 and 3 in Hex. Yeah, you have 0.5 second of a stun, but compared to his other spells that you'd be leveling, or even stats sometimes, is really beneficial because of his low base stats. So you can then opt... there's no real point. If you're going to level Hex to level 2, you need to be maxing it then to level 4, in my opinion, because it's just not worth putting one value point in, when, for instance, you could put another value point into Mana Drain, and the mana that you're stealing doubles per second, so from level 1 to 2. So you've then got you're obviously maxing Impale. You've got one level in Hex, you've got one level in Mana Drain as well. This is where you can sort of do some experimenting. I personally think that putting at least 2 levels into Mana Drain is the best skill build. The reason for this is that, like I said before, it goes from 20 to 40, so it doubles. Then you can choose whether you'd like to max it to the full level, or leave it excuse me, or leave it at level 2. The reason why I think it's beneficial for you to either leave it to level 2 or max it to 4 and not just leave it in 3 is because the jump from 3 to 4, so 60 to 120, is huge. So you're either wanting that massive jump and end up getting it 120, or you're not really caring about the difference between 40 to 60. You don't really... the jump from 2 to 3 isn't really that major for you. So, because we were talking about before that you're wanting to either max Hex as well, that then plays into the fact that if you're not wanting to put one skill point into Mana Drain from 40 to 60 mana a second, you'd then either be putting it into Hex or stats, because you've maxed Impale at that stage. You're not normally wanting to go stats online, however you can, but like I said, there's no real point in putting one level into Hex. If we're going to put one level into Hex, and then not touch that spell again and max mana drain after that. I feel like that's just a waste, because you're not using the scaling of his abilities to your advantage. I'd much rather have, as an example, max Impale, 1 level in Hex, and max mana drain, than max Impale, 2 levels in Hex, and 3 levels in mana drain, because that just seems really dumb to me. You're trading 0.5 of a second stun duration for an extra 60 mana a second, which just doesn't make sense. An alteration to this is that you can get 4 in Impale, 2 in mana drain. So you've obviously got the 2-1-1 build at level 4, then you're maxing Impale. Then at level 8, you can put a second point into the mana drain, but then from level 8 onwards, just max Hex. So you get the jump from 20 to 40 mana in mana drain, but then can max your level of Hex. So you're utilizing the skill patterns and the sort of, I guess, speed bumps for his skill build, and really not wasting any skill points and getting the maximum sort of optimization of those skills. Going on to so that's where I really think as well that there's a lot of experimentation that I've been doing recently, and that I've seen a lot of really high level players going, is that often they're not really wanting to be spending a large amount of their time using the mana drain in team fights. You might just wanting to be chain disabling someone. You're obviously impaling, hexing, and fingering someone and trying to get out of the way. But by then, you need to be trying to assess whether maxing your mana drain is going to be beneficial for you. So, for instance, if there's a lot of small skirmishes, then mana drain's probably going to be a really great choice. The reason for that is that with these small skirmishes, you'll have time to then just regen a lot of your mana. Whereas if you're only really having major team fights, in a major team fight, you're wanting that extra 1.5 second stun with Hex, and not really wanting many points in mana drain, for the sole reason that you're either dying in a team fight and going back and healing at base anyway, or there's so much time in between the fights that you have a lot of time to go back and regen, and that 1.5 second of extra stun time with the Hex actually means that you'll win the team fight rather than slightly lose it or draw it. So that's where game sense really comes into it. You need to make a decision obviously based off that. Now, another thing that I was mentioning when we were talking about the skill builds as well is illusion-based heroes. Mana drain's cooldown at level 4 is 5 seconds. No, sorry, I think it's a little bit more than that. Well, let me just bring that up. Sorry about that. So the mana drain is very, very low cooldown. So at level 4, I can tell you just how much it is. Give me 1 second. So yeah, it is 5 seconds at level 4. The thing about that is that you can remove one illusion from the battle every 5 seconds with that. Whereas if you're not maxing it and leaving it, say, at level 2 like I suggested, it then means you have a 15-second cooldown where you can only get rid of one illusion in that space of time, and generally team fights where you're wanting to get rid of illusions don't really last too long, so you might only get 2 mana drains off in a 30-second team fight, which is generally how long a team fight goes for. So keep in mind that. Really, the point that I'm trying to make is learn those optimized paths in terms of leaving mana drain at level 2 or maxing it, or leaving Hex at level 1 and then maxing it, or maxing it. You don't ever want to be upgrading your mana drain to level 3 and leaving it at level 3, and you don't want to be putting any skill points into Hex unless your aim is to max it. So that's the main sort of point that I'm trying to make there. Item builds, I think that the item builds for Lion are pretty standard at the moment. They're the really only variation sort of early on in the game is whether you want to upgrade your boots to tranquils. This really, for me, heavily depends on the skill build that you've chosen. So going back to like I was saying before, let's say you've chosen to leave Mana Drain at 2 and you've chosen to then max Hex. It means that you don't really have that much sustain in terms of mana compared to what you were if it was maxed. So you're often going to be needing to heal at base anyway for a lot of mana. And if you're low, so Tranquils isn't really worth it for me at that stage. However, if you've gotten max in Mana Drain, Tranquils is definitely worth it early on, because it means that you can basically never go back to base and you can just heal health and mana. Now, I'm by no means saying that you should skip Tranquils. I believe that every single Lion in a game should get Tranquils. The point that I'm trying to make here is that you should really, the timing of when you get the Tranquils should really depend on the skill build. So if you've chosen to max Hex early on, I would just be getting Tranquils after I've already got my Blink Dagger. Whereas if I've chosen to max my Mana Drain, I'd be getting Tranquils earlier on so that I can then sustain more, and because I'm healing from so much mana from the Mana Drain, but then I'm also healing a lot of HP regen from the Tranquils. The next decision that you obviously have to make that I think is core is a stick. Whether you choose to upgrade that to a wand obviously depends on personal preference. Often I'll leave it at a stick until I get my Blink Dagger. But if I feel like I'm not really farming that well and I need the extra 7 wand charges with the upgrade and the extra stats, because keep in mind that Lion's stats are really quite terrible, then yeah, I'll definitely get wand. Blink should obviously be your first item in almost all situations. The one main situation that I can think of off the top of my head where you wouldn't get that is that if there was a clockwork on the enemy team and he just kept killing you in team fights and you found that you were just dying a lot to him, or the enemies or that your allies were dying, I'd pretty much just be getting force into a blink there. But that's sort of a rarity. Even then with a clockwork, I'm really hesitant to be going for a force, because you're wanting to be the ones initiating on them with Lion. I think a really common mistake is by Lion players is that once they get the blink, or how they choose to play the hero, it's not aggressive enough, you know. The hero needs to be played in an aggressive manner, and I think that if he's not, then that actually means that you're wasting the hero. Whenever your Finger of Death is off cooldown, you absolutely need to be going for a kill. Now the Finger of Death cooldown goes from 160 to 100 to 60, I believe. Or it might even be 40, I think, at level 3. I think it is 40 actually. So I think it's really important to be utilizing that as much as possible. And Lion really isn't that good of a hero when you're on the back foot. So, for instance, if the enemy is engaging into you, it's hard to be setting up those multi-hero impales where you can turn around the team fight. Whereas I think that if you're the one initiating, or your team gets the jump first, I think that's really where he excels, because everyone's sort of scrambling, which means that you can then set up that impale really, really well. So I also think that after the Blink Dagger, Force Staff is pretty much key. Core, sorry. It can be replaced with sort of some of the optional ones, which I'll mention in a second, but I think that the Force Staff really gives you good stats, and also means that you can blink into a fight and then get out quickly, and then re-engage once Impale is off cooldown, or if Hex is off cooldown if you've maxed it. Sort of coming into the mid game, then that will sort of hugely depend on how you can play the hero. Keep in mind as well that I didn't really mention mana costs sort of before with all of his spells, but the main thing with Lion is that he really doesn't have that great mana. Because the items that you're going for aren't really stats-based items, it means that his mana progression can become quite limited. So you might really only get, if you don't have an opportunity to mana drain in a team fight and get a fair amount of mana back, then you're often stuck really with only one sort of one cast of each spell. So Impale, Hex, and his ulti. That's where I feel like the wand is a necessity coming into the mid game, but that's also where the Force Staff helps as well. So with the 10 points in intel, you're then getting a lot of mana, which means that you can then go and cast the extra Impale and also the extra Hex that you need in a team fight. I feel like the options that you give for mobility, I guess, really are Yules, but once again, Force Staff for me is just too good to pass up on Lion. You're blinking in, you're hexing or impaling, dropping down your ulti if you're getting the jump on someone, and then forcing out, and the enemy doesn't really have that much time to react to that if you're quick on your fingers. Whereas if you go for items such as an Ag Scepter, yes, you get to blow them up and you get to look cool, but I really feel like that's sort of a lot of waste of money. Ags is just less than double how much it costs to make a Force Staff, so I feel like Force Staff and a Yules is actually just above the cost. Sort of, it's 800 gold more roughly than an Ag Scepter, but does so much more for you. So Ags is an optional thing. That would probably be one of my least bought Lion items, I would say. Another really common one, obviously since the new patch, has been Glimmer Cape. It does really make your mana very limited though, like I mentioned before. So because the items that we've gone for haven't really given us that many stats, so obviously Tranquil's Stick and Wand, Blink and Force Staff, we're pretty limited on mana. So this is where I really feel like Glimmer Cape maybe would come after the Force Staff. But that would really depend. So if you, let's say you were to go Blink and then Glimmer Cape, I feel like you'd really be lacking a lot of mana in those team fights. So you'd then have to itemize slightly differently. So you might get like a Null or a Bracer, or maybe even you might get a point booster or something like that if you're quite wealthy, and then into the Glimmer Cape. But that being said, that's a big investment in terms of you're not just buying the Glimmer Cape, but you're also having to change your item build to what I believe is a less optimal one, just to compensate for that high mana cost in the Glimmer Cape. Another quite sort of forgotten about item, I think, is Ghost Scepter. Being able to blink in and sort of chain disable a couple of people and then have the carry go on you and you just Ghost Scepter, I think that's really, really good. Obviously, there's a lot of carries in this version, or semi-carries, particularly solo mid heroes that have high burst damage. So I feel like it's not going to be relevant in sort of a lot of the games, but there is still a large number of times where the hero that you're initiating on, their counter initiation is going to be physical damage, because you're often not wanting to jump on the carry hero, but you're wanting to jump on more of their utility heroes and burst them first, and then sort of while chain disabling the carry, which means that then Ghost Scepter is really useful because you're disabling the people that normally have the high amount of nuke damage. One really, really key thing as well too that I just see so many people do, which really, really frustrates me, is Level 6 is really, really important on this hero, and I think that people know that, but they don't actually practice it. And so often I'll see a lot of lions visible in the lane at level 6, and wait around for that. And this is in 5k games, and I've seen plenty of pros do it as well, where they'll sit around and not really utilize the fact that if they're off the map, the enemy's going to be really scared. Number one, but number two, you're also wanting that level 6, your ultimate to be off cooldown as soon as possible the first time that you use it. So you're wanting to get a kill with it, and then you're wanting it to go on cooldown as soon as possible. Because the cooldown's so high at level 1, 160 seconds, it means that if you don't use it, so let's say that you run around for sort of 2 minutes and don't use it, if you'd used it within, say, the last minute, it would have almost been halfway off cooldown, or more than that off cooldown, depending on when you used it. So, and you would have had a kill with it. The other benefit as well is that the gold that you get from ganking with the finger now is obviously increased with the XP and gold range or distribution across many heroes, and at this stage, if you're ganking with it, you're probably going to be the hero that has the lowest net worth. So whether it's assist gold or whether you're getting the direct kill, you're actually going to be getting a lot of gold from that, which is where I think that that's really important as well. One thing that you can do, which I think is something to be mindful of if you almost are about to hit level 6, or you know you're about to hit level 6, is get a smoke gank. If you've already got boots by that stage, which I'm hoping that you normally should have, getting a smoke gank up is really important. So put yourself to the side of the trees if you're close to level 6, hit level 6, and then go and smoke gank something. Excuse me. A lot of enemies aren't going to be looking at the hero levels. Obviously very high tier players will, but even high tier players, depending on if there's skirmishes and stuff going on, can forget to look at these things, and that's really important. If they see you hit level 6 in the lane, then they're now aware that you have your ulti up. Whereas if you hit level 6 in the trees and they don't see you and you smoke gank and you kill someone with it, that can be massive. The one thing that I do want to touch on as well is with the lion with his ulti, is that there's the really important threshold early on. So if you're at level 6, you have 200 nuke damage, and it'll be 600 damage after reduction. I think this is wrong for the second one. I think it's 860. I'll just double check it. Then that would depend on the damage after reduction as well. So let's just have a quick look again. I should have left this up. I'm a bit of an idiot for not. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so it is 60. Okay. So in that case, that would then mean that it's 645. So at level 6, the damage threshold for impale and finger to kill a unit is 600 damage after reduction, meaning that if there's a hero that has 600 health or less, you can burst them with impale and your ulti. At level 7, will be, if you've maxed impale, it will be 645 damage. So anyone beneath that threshold. That's a really, really important figure for a lot of people, and I know that a lot of people haven't actually done that, or don't actually take into consideration that when ganking someone, and aren't really aware consciously before the game starts that, that is the damage threshold where I can get killed by a level 6 or level 7 lion. So I think that that's really, really important. That's pretty much all that I have to say on the hero, sort of without going into any in-depth analysis about game styles or your movements. Those are sort of the things that I believe can make you guys much, much better players. And being aware of this as well against facing good players, good lion players in particular, is important. Having an understanding of the hero's strengths and weaknesses, the peak times, what the optimal skill build is, like I mentioned before, depending on whether you want to max hex early on in comparison to mana drain, and then also just being aware that roughly when the lion is level 6, how much health do you have? Can he kill you with an impale finger? That's really, really important early on. So thanks for listening, guys. Sorry about the video before. It'll obviously be a melded video because something went wrong with the first one. But yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed, and I look forward to... I'll be making some guides soon, hopefully, as well. I've been working quite long hours recently, so there should hopefully be some more guides coming out soon. Alright, thanks guys. Catch ya.